Hello, welcome to another episode of Conversations for Change. My name is Laura Dorman, and I'm the Director of Corporate Affairs. And we are thrilled today to welcome our guests, Amy Knight of Knight Law Firm and Tony Bonagas of Colibri Center for Human Rights. We are going to have an amazing conversation today in regards to some of the great work that they're doing. Litify was founded in 2016. We are a cloud-based solution for lawyers, legal law firms, etc., as well as based on the Salesforce platform. I am very excited to welcome one of my colleagues, Max Lieberman, today. Max, you're one of the original OGs. Been here since 2016 with us, a product manager based out of Portland. And you were actually previous to Portland based in Arizona, and that's how you became involved with both Amy and Colibri. Conversations for Change, for those of you that don't know, we are basically a monthly webcast that talks about very nonpartisan and thought-provoking, but also interesting conversations that are happening today in our society. We're just bringing them to light. And today we're going to be talking about the human issues that are involved with the USMexico border. So Max, without any further ado, I would like to toss this over to you. Welcome our guests and please enjoy.
Thank you, Laura. And thanks everyone who is joining us. I'm very excited to be talking to Tony and to Amy. Tony Bonagas is the executive director of the Colibri Center for Human Rights, a nonprofit organization that uses forensic anthropology and advocacy to find the identities of lives lost on the United States-Mexico border, and also to help families find loved ones who have gone missing on the border. He previously served as the honorary consul for Honduras in Arizona from 2006 until 2016. He is currently the chair of the board of advisors for the Consulate Corps of Arizona. In that role, he's the primary contact for Hondurans who are facing challenges along the border and in immigration detention centers and the justice system. Also joining us is Amy Knight, a criminal defense attorney and civil rights attorney in Tucson, Arizona. With the Knight Law Firm, Amy fights for clients who are facing the death penalty and also who have endured serious civil rights violations. That includes the nationally covered Scott Warren trials, in which she represented a humanitarian aid worker who was eventually found not guilty of harboring a pair of migrants from Central America. Thank you both so much for your time today and joining us to talk about human rights issues along the US-Mexico border.
It's good to be here.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning on the West Coast. Good early afternoon on the East Coast, I think. Tony, I wanted to start by asking you to talk a little bit about the Colibri Center for Human Rights. Tell us about the organization, its mission, and a bit about the context in which you work.
Sure. I joined Colibri in July of this year, so it's been 3 months that I assumed the role as CEO, but you had mentioned before my role as a diplomat for Honduras for 10 years. I had a chance to work with Colibri, so I was very familiar with the work. And now to be here at the helm, I'm very blessed and working hard to fulfill our mission. Our mission is very straightforward. We promote healing and change by working with families of missing migrants to honor their death. These are individuals who lost their lives trying to cross the U.S.-Mexico border. The nonprofit started as a group of volunteers at the Pima County Medical Center in Tucson years ago. It became a nonprofit in 2006. And since then, we've been working, like you mentioned, with professionals using DNA to identify remains. Unfortunately, people die every day at the border. I knew this. It was done news to me when I joined Colibri, but now that I'm here, I get reports daily when they find remains or body at the border. Now, remember, this is only the Arizona border, the Sonoran Desert. Right now, unfortunately, we are poised to break a 10-year-old record. In 2010, 220 remains of bodies were found. Right now, as of today, we have 191, and we still have 2.5 months to go before the end of December. So I'm personally, think we're going to break the record. So when the families file a report on our website or our phone, we take as much information as we can, and then we gather the DNA sample. Then we work with a professional lab in the U.S. We pay for the cost, and when we have a match, a positive match, we get an official report from a forensic anthropologist, and we notify the family, which is one of the most difficult things to do, to let someone know, whatever they are, Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, Ecuador, whatever they are, let them know that, good news, we found your daughter, your son, your husband, but he or she is dead. We have the ashes, we have the remains. So it takes a lot of work, compassion, and caring, and that's what we do. We work with the families alongside the process and help them find answers and help to end the suffering. I don't think it's nothing more painful than to lose a loved one far away where you have no idea what, the person is still dead or alive. So we play a critical role, and we work with families throughout the U.S. We have chapters of family networks that we work with to provide support, guidance, and also help them voice their concerns, to hopefully we can bring some change to these policies at the border. So in a nutshell, I think that's what we do.
Thank you, Tony. You mentioned, I think you alluded in talking about breaking that 10-year record to the scale of the problem, and also to the fact that we're obviously talking about loss of human lives and the experiences not just of the people crossing the border, but also families. Do you, for both of you, I think, do you think that this is an issue that is covered accurately in the reporting that you see about border issues nationally?
Not usually. I think to cover it accurately, we would have to see it in the news every day, for one thing. But I don't think that the scale of the problem is appreciated. I think we get sort of glimpses into an event that happened or a particular policy that was enacted that people were upset about. But just the fact that this problem exists here of lost life at the border, I think it really gets undersold.
And I'll just say that, the border between the U.S. and Mexico, I think it's an interesting landscape. I had the privilege to travel from Tijuana all the way to El Paso because of my role as a consul. So I've been in all this on both sides of the border. And one thing about the border is such a unique place. It goes back even before this was a United States. That if we'll remember the history. So it's a long history, very dynamic communities and exchanges between both countries. But yes, in the last 20, 30 years, there have been a lot of changes. I mean, things still remain. The connection between those two countries. Where the board divided because of a treaty back in 1848. But it's still a very dynamic area. Unfortunately, on the border here where we are, it has changed. I can tell you that. It's like a military zone now with all the stuff that's happening with drones and equipment and the walls and construction. This is different than it was, but again, some elements remain the same. The flow of people coming back and forth, those ports still happening in Nogales and Douglas and San Isidro, that still happens every day. So it's an interesting part. But I think the media, to your question, they're usually always interested in the negative aspect of the border, which is, there are some things that are happening that are challenging, but the border as a whole was a unique area, and you have to experience it to see what it's like. But it's a very unique area from my point of view.
Thank you. In that role as a diplomat, Tony, did you have experiences, learn things in those 10 years that shaped your perspective on the work that Colibri does, and also on the current crisis on the border in terms of the scale of the loss of life that we're talking about?
Yes, I think for me, and this is true now that I'm at Colibri, when I look back, when you think of a man or a woman in Honduras and El Salvador and Ecuador and Chile that makes that decision to come, to provide for their families, you're looking at someone who does not speak the language, has limited resources, and then they find themselves in a system, the detention center, for example, or dealing with a sheriff or the county. I learned firsthand how important it is to have allies who can speak on their behalf, because when you don't speak a language, you don't understand what's going on. It's like being blind. You don't know what rights you have. You're deprived of your basic rights. So as a diplomat, I had to do that a lot on behalf of Hondurans at that time, going to detention centers, medical centers, whatever I need to go. Now with Colibri, of course, doing the same thing. That's such a critical aspect, and people are grateful, because it's completely foreign to you. You don't only not speak the language, but don't understand the system. So you can imagine how challenging that is, trying to deal with a system that's very bureaucratic, very formal, and you don't have a clue. So we play a critical role in being that voice, and we have great rapport with the family because they know we are acting on their behalf to help them navigate the system. And in this case, Colibri is trying to find some answers, really hard answers, about their loved ones who've been disappeared or dead, and trying to deal with the system is very challenging. So I'm proud of our team. We're very committed, and we do that every day by phone and person, any way we can do it. And it means a lot to the families. And
I think it's in this context, sometimes it's such a politicized issue, but what we're talking about here is something I think everybody really can and should agree on, which is that we don't want people dying. And that the scale of this problem has just been immense. What I'm showing you here is a map that we've used in some litigation that I may talk about a little later with the jury, but you're looking at a map that this is just an area of the border that we call the West Desert. So we have Arizona. This is the southern part of Arizona, just a segment of the border. And each one of those red dots represents a place where human remains were found of people who had died in that desert trying to cross. So just looking at all of those in just this one segment of the border, that's one way to see the scale of the human rights crisis we're talking about here.
Wow, that's a striking visual. As you said, this isn't necessarily a partisan issue. Also, in the sense that the origins of this loss of human life, the scale of this, is tied to policies that have sort of come from all over the political spectrum. And Amy, I think probably both of you have some insight into that, but Amy first. In terms of policy, could you talk about what some of the policies that are currently in place that are a problem are in your view?
Sure. I think the policy that's sort of at the root of the swell in deaths that has happened in the modern era is an enforcement strategy that the Border Patrol uses called prevention through deterrence. And what that is basically they've decided to try to push people away from crossing in urban areas and cities, and make it so that if they're going to attempt to cross, they're going to do it in remote, rocky, inhospitable areas of the desert. And that they're both easier to apprehend that way, and that it would make people not come because the journey would be so dangerous that they would decide not to do it, not to risk their life. So that policy requires people to decide not to risk their life, and it requires then the journey to be life-threatening in order for that policy to work. That is in the Border Patrol Strategic Plan from 1994. So that's a Clinton-era policy that continues to this day and is used by the agency through the transformations that happened with all of these agencies after September 11th, we got the Department of Homeland Security, which now encompasses the Border Patrol as well. And that policy has endured. And if we didn't have that policy, we probably wouldn't see so many people trying to cross in this life-threatening way.
Are there
And
oh, go ahead, Tony.
If I may add quickly also to what Amy just said, also Project Streamline in 2005, when I was a consul, I remember dealing with Hondurans who, they get apprehended one time, and they get deported. They do a week, 2 weeks at the detention center, and will get deported. If they got apprehended a second time, they may do a 30 days or maybe a longer, lengthy period of time in detention, but they will go back. What happened with this Project Streamline is the whole system has been criminalized. So now they are criminally charged. So the court system is have a huge backlog in the court system, and more migrants are being charged criminally. So you have the proliferation of prisons, private prisons who have been exploding all over the border. So it's very complex, it's convoluted, but it's all this has contributed to very harsh penalties and a lot of time violations of basic human rights. So, and like you said, it covers both Republicans and Democrat administrations. So it's both parties are responsible for some of these policies.
Amy, I know you've had the opportunity to work with clients who are migrants. You've also had the experience of working with someone who was fairly prominently charged with harboring migrants in Scott Warren. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that case in particular and what he did, what he was charged with, what the outcome was.
Sure. Scott Warren, we refer to him often as Dr. Scott Warren. He has a PhD in geography, is a volunteer here in Southern Arizona who works with an organization called No More Deaths, and also with an organization called Aho Samaritans. And what these groups do is they provide humanitarian relief in this deadly desert area to try to prevent more of those little red dots from coming up on that map that we looked at. They also try to assist in locating human remains. They also do some search and rescue. So that's the context of who Scott Warren is and who he's working with. In the very beginning of 2019, he was at a camp run by one of these groups. It was mostly a camp for the volunteers to stage when they would then go out into the remote desert and provide supplies, leave gallons of water for people to find, things like that. And two migrants, a young man from El Salvador and a young man from Honduras, came by their camp having walked through the desert looking for some respite, some medical care. And Scott was sort of in charge that day at the camp, and they came in. He did a quick medical screening on them. Many of these volunteers are doctors, nurses, EMTs. Scott was a wilderness first responder, so they have some training. He did a medical examination, and then they stayed there to recover. One of them had an injury, one of them had a cold. They stayed there for a couple of days, and the Border Patrol had been surveilling the camp as part of an ongoing investigation they were doing into these humanitarian activities. And they saw Scott Warren with these two men in the driveway and came in and arrested all three of them. He was charged with harboring an illegal alien, is the language in the statute, which is a felony, a federal felony crime in the federal court here in Tucson. Then it was 2 counts of that, one for each of the people. And then they also charged him with conspiracy to transport and harbor these 2 men. And my colleague, Greg Kirkendall, took on the case pro bono with his firm. I was working with him at the time at the firm, and the two of us defended Dr. Warren against these federal felony charges, and actually also against some misdemeanor charges that had been brought around the same time for their activities of putting gallons of water in the desert. That was construed as basically littering.
Which is the gallons of water being essentially an effort to save lives because people are dying of thirst when crossing the desert.
Exactly, yes. So there was a trial and there was a hung jury on these federal counts, which he could have faced 20 years in federal prison on these counts. They're serious. So we had eight jurors voted to acquit, 4 jurors voted to convict. And the United States attorney decided to try again to get a conviction. So we had a second trial about a year ago now, in which there was an acquittal in about an hour. It was a very fast acquittal, and Dr. Warren is free.
And how long was that ordeal for Dr. Warren from I guess arrest through eventual exoneration?
It was 2 years approximately that he was, and he was on supervised pretrial release. I mean, he had to check in with a probation officer. They took his passport. He couldn't leave the state without permission from the judge. So all throughout that time, he was facing a pretty heavy burden, even though he was eventually not convicted.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the outcome there to you and to your client both. Tony, I wanted to ask you about the relationship of Colibri with authorities, I guess both federal and then also whether there's a difference between that and the relationships that you may have with local or Arizona authorities. I think you mentioned that the origins of the nonprofit actually are in work that was being done at the Pima County Medical Examiner's Office originally, more than a decade ago.
Yes. We, again, that's at the core, we work closely with the Pima County Medical Center. We work, being who we are, a nonprofit at 501c3, of course, we work with all the different systems. I mentioned, I think at the beginning, when migrants leave their homeland, there are so many touch points. They may go through different countries, they go to Mexico, so they come in touch with different systems. So we, in the process, when we're trying to identify and help the families find someone, of course, we interact, and we have to interact with all the systems, and we do it very professionally. One thing I can tell you is that we will never compromise, the safety or security of the families. That's what they trust us. We do have a very secure database, and we give assurances to our families because they fear, a lot of these families fear their homeland, their government. They don't trust authorities, government, and especially being in a foreign land. So we're very careful and professionally how we handle that, but we interact with all the systems because we have to. Medical center, sheriff's office, the detention center, border patrol. Part of my role now as a CEO is meeting with all those folks. I mean, I have relationship with them going back when I was a consul. So as soon as this COVID-19 is over, I already have meetings set up with heads of border patrol throughout the border because at some point we do need to interact and exchange information. But our goal is still the same, always to find answers for their families who have lost a loved one at the border.
And I might add something to that. Tony just mentioned that some of these people really are mistrustful of authority. And that's part of the reason also why the humanitarian relief that is provided by these people in the desert is so crucial. They can get medical care or emergency water in some situations from the Border Patrol if they can find Border Patrol personnel out there, which often they can't, but if they could, but then they would be arrested and deported and maybe charged with a crime. And So a lot of people who are very much in need of emergency care will avoid seeking it, even at the risk of their life, because they're afraid of these law enforcement consequences. So these volunteers provide just these basic life-saving aid, water, or care that's not tied to law enforcement. So they're neutral on law enforcement, the volunteers, for the most part. All they do is provide basic life support type needs. And it's really important for there to be a way for people in such danger to access life-saving care without that deterring factor of law enforcement.
Thank you. That is a good point, an interesting point. If I remember correctly, again regarding the Dr. Scott Warren case, it wasn't simply some of the organizations that sort of flocked to Dr. Warren's defense were not who we might think of as just like on the left or anti-government types of organizations, but included lots of groups, including many religious groups that had an interest in humanitarian care and treatment of people on the border. Do I remember that correctly?
Yes, there's a lot of interest from religious groups. In fact, it's a church, the Unitarian Universalist Church here in Tucson, that sponsors that particular group of volunteers. But I think many faith communities see this sort of care of others on a human level as part of their religion. It's part of many established world religions. So that actually became part of the defense that what Dr. Warren was doing was part of a spiritual practice. But it was a very important issue in the spiritual community as well.
Thank you. Tony, I wanted to ask you about Colibri's most recent campaign, which is titled "Cuántos Más?" or "How Many More?" What is the campaign about, and how long has it been running? How has it been going so far?
Great. So if you ask me, what has been the biggest aha moment for me in my time in Colibri in the last 3 months, it would be the fact that now that I'm here, I spend a lot of time on the phone and video conference and even face-to-face now that the COVID is kind of slowing down. I had face-to-face meeting with potential funders, donors, and supporters. And when I talked about the numbers, the response that I hear all the time, I had no idea. I had no clue that many people are dying or died at the border. So that it just gives me the more impetus that I'm here to make sure that people know about what's happening. So cuántos más, how many more? I mentioned some numbers. One thing with the numbers of missing and dead is they're accurate. Anyone will tell you those numbers aren't accurate by no means. Even the one I mentioned, we have found so far 191 in Arizona. So as of today, we know those numbers are not accurate. They are undercounted. There's still people out there under a tree, under a cactus who had not been found yet. Constantly I get an email when they find remains. They will find a skull or a leg or foot. I don't want to be graphic, but that's reality. So the point, even with the numbers that we have, more than 7,800 deaths, 191 this year with the COVID-19, the numbers are staggering. So our campaign is Cuántos Más. We launched that last week using social media, and we're using some matching funds ideas to raise awareness so people know. So hopefully I won't hear that answer anymore. Like I had no idea. So people know that is happening daily, even with the summer heat, with the COVID-19, the numbers have been going up. So to raise awareness and to raise funds, to do the work that we do, I mentioned is very scientific, very forensic work. It costs money. Right now we pay $79 to do an analysis, but that's when we send a batch of 50. So my goal now as a new role as a CEO, I don't want to wait longer. I tell my staff, I want to, if when we get a report, if we get a good DNA sample, I'd like to be able to send that tomorrow, next day mail, so we can get answers right away, so we won't have to wait until we get a batch of 50. So that's our campaign, to raise awareness so people understand the magnitude. This is a tragedy that, because I've been active as a consul before, I've seen a lot of things. I'm not surprised what I see because I've been there before, but the numbers that keep going up, even with the COVID-19. I just went to lunch on Friday with someone, and she said that she thought that because COVID-19, everything came to a halt. There was nothing happening on the border. And I said, no, it's quite this. I show her some of the numbers by month. During the summer month, at the height of COVID-19, that did not change. So that's our purpose, to raise awareness so people understand and hopefully do something. We need systemic changes, and it's a very complex issue, but we need to acknowledge and be aware of what's going on. Do something.
I think we have a video related to that campaign. Perfect. I think you talked about the efforts that Colibri takes to use DNA to identify people. You've also talked, of course, about working with the families. When did Colibri start working with DNA to try to identify these unidentified people who've died in the desert? How long has that effort been ongoing?
It's been going on for almost 4 years. The Colibri started in 2006. But we had a great support from some national funders in 2016. We were able to engage into using DNA, which is very scientific, very accurate. So almost 4 years now, and I don't want to brag, but we have that lot of systems run by the government, CODIS, NAMES. We have collected 3 times more. We have more positive IDs. One thing I didn't mention is that today we have 204 positives that we have helped identify through our work with Colibri and other partners. That's way more than other groups that work in this area. So it's very scientific, very accurate, and very practical. You can buy a kit. It's still best practice that we have to follow, but we can mail the DNA kit with instructions to families in El Salvador, Guatemala, wherever they are. And there's make sure that are secure, and we mail it to the lab, and then we can get, we try to get as many as we can, of course, sample from family members to make sure we have a positive 99.9 accuracy. But it's a very scientific, very reliable.
It's a remarkable achievement to have achieved that many identifications. I think I wanted to track back briefly to the question of policy and ask if there are any other things that any other policy changes that either Colibri or that Amy, in your work as an attorney, you see an opportunity to advocate for, and for people who are listening at home and watching at home today to advocate for, that would make a real difference in alleviating the scale of the death that we're talking about. Amy, I guess let me direct that to you first.
Sure. I think in addition to the Border Patrol's enforcement strategy, and that's sort of difficult because it comes through an executive agency. It's not a statute or a regulation that can just be, you can't just advocate repeal that, and it's not simple like that. But that, that's something that needs to change, I think, and talking about it and becoming aware of it is part of how that will happen. There's been some really distressing things going on with the asylum policies that are being implemented right now. And that's connected because what asylum basically is a way that somebody who's really in danger and fear for their life has a way to legally seek refuge here. And that's been greatly restricted in the present administration through just policy changes that they made. And then it's been even more dramatically restricted in the time of COVID. So I think returning to the asylum policies that we have on paper that are agreed as part of international law is a way to safeguard human rights.
And I just couldn't pass this opportunity, Jeff, to, we're less than 2 weeks away from the election. And, there's a saying here that elections have consequences. And one thing I do know, I learned a long time ago, is it makes a difference, who controls Congress, the House, the Senate, the White House, and the Supreme Court. Because immigration, the Congress has the ultimate authority to shape immigration. So there's a great opportunity right now for people to go out and elect individuals, men and women who understand this issue, who take an interest and look at this. Because I'll be the first one to tell you, and Amy, I'm sure you'll agree, it's not easy. It's very complex and very convoluted. And I had an interview with a newspaper last week from Finland, and they were pointing out the fact that in the campaign right now, we haven't heard anything about immigration. That was interesting. It's right. But there's a big elephant in the room that we need to talk about, and we need to elect men and women who can really look at this, take an interest, and do something. It's complex, but it'll require complex solutions, but it can be addressed.
Thank you both. I think I'll take that opportunity to mention briefly Power the Polls, which is an organization that Litify is working with to try to recruit additional poll workers, of which we're expecting to have a national and fairly severe shortage this year due to COVID. Many of my colleagues here at Litify are volunteering to work at polling centers in their areas, and I encourage everyone listening at home to go to powerthepolls.org as well. It's very easy to sign up and get information about how you can do that if that's a thing that it will be safe for you to do. I think we do have a couple of questions that have come in, and I want to turn to those, and then I was going to ask, of course, how people can individually help support Colibri, but let's save that for a moment and just tackle a couple of questions that have come in. One is a question from Christine. How do you communicate the human aspect of this issue to people who have strong opposing opinions? I think we've alluded to that somewhat, but when you're actually having a direct face-to-face conversation with someone who views things through a different lens, what's a way to approach that?
I had that question asked many times. One thing I say when I was at the consul and now that I'm here, people would ask me the question all the time, why would people risk, their life of loved ones or their life and do this something illegal? And I say, would I risk my life to provide for my children? I have two daughters, Sara and Sabrina. Would I come to a point that I care so much, I love these children so much that I'm willing to risk my life? I would risk my life. So I see it from that point of view, that people will pay the ultimate price to provide for their families. So we'll start from there. One thing, when you see it that way, that these are not illegal, they're not, criminals, these are people trying to provide for their families. Most men and women, mothers and fathers, will do that for their children. So they're human beings just like you and me. And so we start with that point. And regardless, because a lot of argument that we hear, why don't they come legally? Come the right way. You hear that a lot, come the right way. It's not easy. Then I try to explain to them the process, because they think that you can just go to a consulate in any of those countries, the embassy, and apply for a visa. It's not that simple. It's very complicated. So let's start with the human aspect. These are men and women who who, one thing I learned is that, and I say this all the time, that any parent in Honduras and Ecuador and Chile and Africa, they'll stay in their community. If they had a healthcare, they have job, they have food, they'll stay there. No one will want to go to a foreign land, different culture, different language. They'll stay where they are. But they do this to provide for their families, like anybody else. I tell this person, you would do the same thing for your children.
I'd like to add something as well. I think beyond just the level of people making the choice to come here, and that's one area that we can talk about. And I think that's what you're talking about, Tony, and that is really controversial. I think aside from that, also, though, we can talk about, no matter what you think about that choice, it's not punishable by death. Crossing the border illegally is not a capital crime. And the policy that we have now and the situation that we have now on the border is causing people to die for trying to do that. And that should not be. Whether that they should be punished and deported when they try to make that crossing, whether you believe that we should have open borders, whether you believe they should or shouldn't come, or you would or wouldn't come in their position, it's not okay for people to lose their lives because of a policy and enforcement strategy. So even if you think that enforcement is very, very important, it needs to happen more stringently, I think finding a way to do that preserves human life is something we should be able to agree on.
Amen.
Amen. With that in mind, what can people do if they do care about this issue? We've already talked about voting. From your perspective, I guess, Tony, I'd love to hear what people can do to support Colibri.
Well, for us, of course, we are right now very active in social media. We have a campaign going on right now, Cuantos Más, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, but people can look at our website, colibricenter.org, and you'll find information about our work. We unfortunately, when I was hired, 3 months ago, Amy was on the hiring panel. I said, I hope one of these days, in not such a distant future, there won't be a need for Colibri to do the work that we do. And I mean that. We'll be able to find more remains. But unfortunately, right now, they still have a lot of work to do. As I mentioned, the report that I get daily when they find remains is happening right now. So we'll be busy for a few more years. So still a lot of work ahead. And again, it takes resources to do the work that we do. Families have waited a long time. And my goal is to reduce that time so I don't have to wait any longer, because you can imagine the anguish and sitting far away, wondering about your husband, your son, your daughter, if they're dead or alive. And it's just painful. I mean, there's no way to describe that. And so we try to ease the pain and do what we do 7 days a week. So please check our website and see what you can do. We also do interns, a lot of interns to help our work. But check our website and see how you can support our work.
And that's colibricenter.org, COLIBRI center.org. Amy, anything to add on the what can individuals do before we close?
Learn about it, talk about it. I think those are important things. Those drive change.
Thank you so much. Thank you both so much for joining us and for having this conversation. It was really wonderful to get your perspectives on such an important issue.
I thank you, Jeff. I thank you. You were on the board of Colibri, so thank you for your time. And Amy, of course, has been a stalwart and big supporter of Colibri on the board too. So I'm personally grateful to the two of you for your time to Colibri. Thank you.
Thank you. And Laura, welcome back.
Thank you so much. And this time I'm not choking, so my apologies on my pausing before. Live Zoom, here you go. I just want to thank you both, Amy, Tony. Fascinating. I mean, I do think people are not aware. I know certainly I wasn't aware. Max, thank you so much for bringing this to light. This is part of Conversations for Change. These are things that are important to people in our community at Litify. So I want to thank you all for being here. Certainly feel free to check us out on LinkedIn, Facebook. Also, this will be rebroadcast on our website, www.litify.com. So please feel free to check that out. Also, please do join us in November. We'll be talking to the Wounded Warrior Project, and we'll be talking about mental health issues, including PTSD and suicide awareness. So do feel free to check us out in November. That's another conversation that's upcoming. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. We encourage you to do better and be better. Thank you.
Thank you.